Hey, I'm Jimmy, and this is my Week 9 discussion board post. This week we read a few various poems from Countee Cullen, and we read The Sculptor's Funeral by Willa Cather. We were asked to compare writers Cullen, Hughes, and Wright, and the similarities and differences the three African American authors had on their outlooks of America. Although, to be quite honest, I don't go that deep into poetry usually when I read it, and it was nice what Cullen and Hughes wrote, but the only one that actually wrote anything that was like a paper was Wright. So, I mean, I don't really think I can cover what their opinions were because it didn't seem like they really addressed anything specifically, at least for me. So I'm going to skip to the second question. The second question we were asked is about how Cather explores class structure and elitism in The Sculptor's Funeral. And to begin with, I'd like to talk about the reception that Harvey Merrick came home to for his funeral. He had brothers that never showed up to his funeral at any time, and the townspeople showed up to receive his casket and carry it for him, but it was mostly out of curiosity. His closest understudy, Stevens, accompanied Merrick's body home from where he was in Boston, I believe, to make sure everything went okay for his teacher's funeral. Besides Stevens, Jim Laird, and the Merrick's family, there was really no one else that cared that Merrick had died, at least in the town. It's interesting because Harvey Merrick was a world-renowned sculptor, and yet the townspeople were still unimpressed with what he had amounted to. They sat around after his viewing was over and talked about little things that they didn't like about Harvey, things that they had no particular reason to dislike about him. You could say that none of the people really had a horse in the race with Harvey, meaning that he never really did anything to them or owed them anything, and yet they still had their deep-seated hatred and dislike towards him. According to the people that actually knew him well, it was said that you couldn't find a nicer guy than Harvey. And even though his mom was crazy, he was still a faithful son who would come home every year or two, even though it was definitely no fun for him to. And we can see that the class system is breaking down a little bit in writing because considering that Harvey was actually like what would be considered upper class, he came home to be hated by the middle and lower class townspeople he had grown up with. And there's also the servant that's involved in the story. Roxy is her name, I believe. She's a black servant that the mother beats for messing up some dressing for the chicken. And the lady isn't actually owned as a slave, but she was from a poorhouse. And I guess the treatment was still better than whatever the poorhouse had. So you can see then again that African Americans are being somewhat mistreated throughout this story, but it's not a big part. Also, if I were to discuss elitism in The Sculptor's Funeral, I would have to say that the townspeople either really resented how successful Harvey was, or they genuinely thought of themselves as better than him. Even though Jim Laird points out that they've all screwed up with their children and that they've all cheated and deceived people to get where they are today. Jim went to school with Harvey and came back to the town only to be corrupted himself. And he addresses the fact that he came back and ended up being corrupted, and obviously you can tell he regrets it because he drinks a lot, and that's mostly to forget his problems. But the point is that it is surprising to me that the middle class is portrayed as the most elite or most privileged group, even among Harvey, who's a master sculptor and someone who's world-renowned. And Stevens, who's his understudy, can't really believe what he sees. He ends up leaving with a greater appreciation for his teacher's kindness and ability, considering where his upbringing was. And he also, and the reading definitely showed us that it's not always the upper class who act entitled and exclusive.